Welcome to Potter Revisited, episode 87. I'm Tori.
And I'm Shay.
Today we are covering chapter 27 of Goblet of Fire, Padfoot Returns.
Or, as we like to call it, the Scarlet Woman.
So we open this chapter leaving off from the second task, where, Harry risked it all to save everyone. And Harry notes that it's interesting this time he went through this thing because now Ron can kind of share the glory with him. So Ron is suddenly changing up the story about how he was fighting mer people and when he starts to get attention for it. And that's just such a classic teenager thing that, you slightly start to exaggerate the stories once you start getting, a lot of attention.
Yeah, especially poor Ron. He's like, being unconscious for most of the story isn't good. I want everyone to listen to me attentively, so I'm gonna embellish.
But then poor Hermione's being teased about being the thing that Krum would miss the most, and then she is, rudely what are you gonna do, snore at them? And Ron goes back to, the original story. We talked a bit about Hermione being the thing that Krum would miss the most. I'm like, is this a red flag?
You gotta think some people at least would be friends with him just to be near, a famous athlete, At the bare minimum, he has fake friends.
It's interesting that people are teasing her about it. You think people would try and, be closer to her so they can get, an in for Krum.
Yeah, kind of. If anything, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, 2 famous wizards are obsessed with you? Okay, Hermione. We're impressed.
Let's be friends.
It's kind of like, even if you're not into someone, if a bunch of people who are obviously very famous or interesting or attractive are into them, suddenly people start, it's the whole Pete Davidson thing, right? One famous hot lady, Kate Beckinsale, decides he's good enough for her time, and suddenly other famous ladies are like, maybe he must be good enough for my time. Not to compare Hermione to that slimy man, because she's obviously fantastic, but there is a psychological justification for that sort of social theory that you value what people you think are valuable value, Everyone should be trying to hit on Hermione now.
What also happened previously was Hermione kind of talked back to Rita Skeeter, and Ron warned her, oh, she's gonna come after you, and Hermione's like, I don't give a shit, because it's Hermione. And this is where it comes out because Rita Skeeter releases an article about Harry and his supposed love life at Hogwarts, which basically paints Hermione as someone who's kind of two-timing Harry and Victor Krum, and she might be using a love potion, and it's just really gross and icky, and I still can't believe that she's able to publish this about a minor unknown. We remember reading stuff about, teen idols when we were growing up, like Lindsay Lohan, and all, the shenanigans she got into, probably someone she was a minor. I think it's Hermione's not a notable person. She's just a student. And it feels icky to be writing all these things about, and accusations about a minor child, which Hermione's only 14 at this point. Yeah, it's just really gross.
Yeah, it is really gross. But Hermione does handle it really, really well. I, for one, would be furious. But I'm not surprised by Hermione's handling of it. She has a really strong sense of self, and she knows that it's not true. Mistreating men and breaking hearts and cheating on boyfriends are not issues she has. So she's really not sensitive to anything about that. So rumors regarding those just don't impact her at all. I do kind of hope she discusses the article with Victor, though. I feel like he deserves to hear from her that that's not a true thing. She was never dating Harry. And maybe even Harry could back her up and let him know as well. Hey, me and Hermione don't have feelings like that. I just want to be transparent with you. It's cool. We're just friends.
I don't think she does, because Krum confronts Harry, I think next chapter, about, what's your deal with Hermione? What's going on? She talks about you all the time. And Harry's like, we're friends, dude, we're friends.
I also kind of feel even if Hermione said, no, me and Harry are just friends. If you were a woman cheating on your boyfriend with someone else, you might not flatly tell him, yes, that guy's my boyfriend. So confirming with Harry might just be confirming what Hermione said if she did discuss it with him. Hey, you're not her boyfriend, right? No, I'm not. Okay, good. That's what she said. Just getting that extra information because maybe in Bulgaria, there are actual laws regulating what the press can say. So Victor's if the press wrote this, there must be some truth to it or else that's just slander, right? Right? And it's just, no, that they can just say whatever they want about minors, apparently, in the wizarding world in the UK. That's just the norm.
The worst part about all of this is obviously Hermione gets, hate mail, which is actually crazy thinking about that.
That it's so real. That's so real life. Some girl dates some celebrity guy or has rumored to, and everyone just sends them hate mail and death threats. Like, that checks out.
Yeah, but I think the worst thing is that Mrs. Weasley believes this article and she treats Hermione poorly because of that. And she only stops because Harry tells her. And I get that she cares about Harry, but like at this point, she's known Hermione for like 4 years.
Yeah, she should also care about Hermione.
And she knows that Rita Skeeter is full of shit too, because they talked about it earlier in the book. So yeah, it just kind of like.
Yeah, I get that. I also kind of feel like maybe there's a sort of old-timey belief that like boys and girls can't just be friends, and I feel like that's definitely the generation that was like, okay, Hermione's friends with two boys, one of them has to, like, she has to be in love with one of them, obviously, right? Like, that's the only way that makes sense. And like, to be fair, she is, but it's not Harry and she's not there yet, you know? So I think Miss Weasley just sort of was entirely led astray, but it's hard to be mean to her about that. Like, if anything, confirm with her, hey, Hermione, I read this article about you, and I just want to check in that you're okay, because this doesn't sound like the you I know. And then Hermione could be like, oh God, no, none of that's real facts. Don't worry about it. But like, I feel like she owes Hermione at bare minimum to reach out to her and like talk about it and make sure she's okay, because like, she's a child. I also think Ron handles the article really well, which sort of is surprising because he definitely has a habit of overreacting when it comes to things involving Hermione like that. I mean, even he knows that the Harry bit is fake, but like, he really only shows mild amounts of insecurity about the whole Hermione thing and just lightly brings up Hermione being invited to spend the summer with Victor. He doesn't really let it get to his head. He doesn't go on about it and be all mopey and whiny. And that's definitely growth for Ron and his ability to just exist in a world where boys might like Hermione.
Yeah, he's very much kind of grappling with some, I think, big feelings that he's not like, fully letting himself realize yet. But he's he's kind of seeing like the reality of Victor and Hermione, like this could be like a thing. And going back to Krum does ask Hermione to spend the summer with him, and I'm like, is this weird because of the age gap that we know of?
But I wonder like what the circumstances are of that. Like, he probably still lives with his parents, so there's probably some degree of like parental supervision.
Yeah.
Like, spending the whole summer with someone seems crazy. Like, I wouldn't spend the whole summer with like anybody.
But the thing is that Hermione already does that with Ron's family.
It's true. She does not spend time with her parents ever. But like, I can see why he would invite her. But I can also see realistically, once they both go home, their parents be like, no, neither of you is spending the whole summer with some person. Like, she can come for a week. That'll be fine. We'll supervise. We'll invite her parents too. Like, you can't have this like 14-year-old girl come and spend the summer unsupervised. She doesn't know how well we supervise the two of you. Like, that's unrealistic. But like, as a feasible thing adults would approve of. But just coming from the teenage boy who likes the teenage girl, I can absolutely believe he would invite her to that. I just don't think either of their parents would agree with that amount of time, or they would have to settle a lot of supervising.
Krum also says that he's never felt this way about anyone else, and so I kind of think it does show that Victor really has like no other friends, or like he's just very sheltered, I feel like, because he's really latched on to Hermione. He's only known her for a few months, and like she's the thing he'll miss the most, and he wants her to come visit him over the summer, where we get kind of from Hermione that like she likes him, but we don't really see like the feelings there. Like, she's a bit embarrassed telling Harry and Ron, but I think that's just because like a deep kind of feeling thing. Like, Hermione doesn't really have girlfriends to talk to this about, because it's something that she would usually bring out to Harry and Ron, especially knowing Ron's feelings about Victor. This would probably be something to talk to Ginny about.
I think the thing about specifically male athletes who are very elite is that it is a very sheltered life. Like, your life sort of revolves around that sport, and most of the relationships you have, the people you see the most and you spend the most time with, are people with whom your relationships are based on that sport. So like, he's probably close to his teammates, but because of that sport. And he probably has people who really like him, but it's because he's good at that sport. And so like, all the people he's been close to have been primarily based on Quidditch and his ability to play Quidditch. And I think Hermione might be the first person he's had time to be around in a not primarily Quidditch-based environment, and the first person he's bonded with that wasn't based on that Quidditch skill. So like, it's the first time he's felt like someone just likes him for like being Victor and not being Victor Krum, Bulgarian seeker, you know? So I feel like that in itself is very validating to him, probably as a human. Like, oh, just like as a person to hang out with, I'm valuable and I'm interesting enough for this really smart and interesting girl to want to spend time with me. So like, I can see why he would sort of jump quickly into had never having felt this way before and wanting to spend the summer with her because she's providing him with something he's never really had the space to have before, you know? So even if Hermione isn't the person for him, these feelings are valid and he'll probably feel similarly to another person one day who he can also form a non-Quidditch based relationship with. But for the time being, it's just like, it's so fresh. It's shown me when these feelings are feelings of love, feelings of loving someone who values you in that way. It's just not necessarily going to always be tied to Hermione. He just doesn't know that yet. I wonder if the Scarlet Woman reference is based on the Scarlet Letter, I'm assuming, like the book
Oh, yeah.
where the Scarlet Letter is the A for adulterer because Hermione is implied to be a cheater. But that's such a mom reference, like to refer to someone as a Scarlet Woman. Like, it's such a mom, like this author doesn't always do the best job of having characters communicate in a way that makes sense for their age. Like, she gets the kids right, but sometimes goes off base a bit when it comes to the mature older adult characters. So it's nice to see a reference like that that's very much the right age group maturity level for Miss Weasley. I'm like, okay, yes, that is well done characterization of that character and terminology of like Mrs. Weasley and Rita Skeeter, like both of their age groups sort of check out with that.
Yeah, you can just see Mrs. Weasley, like, having this magazine at, like, her quilting bee or something and be like, oh, this Scarlet Woman, have you seen this? To all her friends.
And to think we had her in our home, like, just overreacting horrendously and, like, reading the gossip mags the same way someone does who's not involved with any of the people, but, like, she is actually kind of connected to some of those people.
But Snape comes over to make things 10 times worse, per usual, and he sees the magazine and decides, to embarrass Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Mostly, I think, Hermione and Harry as their reference in the article, and he decides to read this out loud. And just why?
I think it's very much the equivalent of teachers who, when they caught their students texting in class, would be like, or passing notes, they'd be like, that's it, I'm going to make you read this to the whole class. I think it's very much a teacher thing to do. It's very much a teacher who doesn't want to be a teacher thing to do. Well,
it's definitely Snape trying to get back at Harry, because Snape thinks that Harry has stolen from him, and Harry's not smart enough to steal from Snape, so he's just...
Yeah, but to be fair, the thing was stolen from Snape, and it did end up being used by Harry, so, like, he's not off base, and Harry never sees consequences for his actions, so, like, as a fellow petty person, even though Snape, as a teacher and an adult, shouldn't be making Harry's life miserable, as just, like, a general petty person, I can understand being like, this person constantly does shit, never sees the consequences of their actions, and I'm annoyed. Like, there is no justice when this person is the perpetrator.
It's just kind of icky that, like, an adult is seeing, like, this news article that is public, that is, like, saying these things about minor children, and is just, he's egging it, like, the conversation on. Like, he knows this isn't real. So I'm giving him a sucks point for that, because he's just embarrassing Harry for, like, literally no reason other than he's mad at him.
He's taking other feelings about Harry out using this article as, like, his weapon.
He also later threatens Harry because it's like, I know you stole this stuff from me, and Harry's like, well, actually, in his head, he's like, well, actually, Hermione and Dobby stole those things, not me, but, I guess.
I kind of get it, the idea of, like, not in this case because Harry's a student, but generally they should be using truth serum. If it's a thing that exists, like, yeah. I'm not terribly mad at it. In, like, criminal cases and stuff, I don't think I'm mad at it.
I guess it's something about kind of, like, I think it's the deal of, like, consent and stuff like that. Kind of like the deal of love potions. It's like, if you're given a truth potion, it's, like, against your will.
Yeah, I think, like, in a predetermined setting with rules attached to it, truth serum makes sense for, like, legal proceedings. Like, you can only ask questions pertaining to the crime. Like, did you commit this crime? Why did you commit this crime? You can't, like, so are you dating this person? Like, you have to have a pre-approved list of questions that directly pertain to whether or not they committed the crime and whether or not they were, whatever, coerced into doing it or under the manipulation of someone else or blackmailed into it, I think that's a case where it would make sense to use it, but he shouldn't be using it on children, but threatening to use it on children isn't the worst thing, just to get them to be honest.
I'm giving Snape a sucks point for just threatening to, give Harry a truth potion for literally no reason.
I accept the sucks point for calling out the magazine article. I will not accept the sucks point for threatening to use truth serum, because if it existed in the real world...
Well, it's against the rules. Snape just like, I might just break the law one day, and...
In Snape's mind, how many perceived rules does Harry break before Snape is justified breaking a rule in retaliation,
But Harry is a child, and Snape is an adult.
I guess it's just like the petty in me is just like, do you know how annoying it would be if someone constantly did shit to you, and then you never saw them face any consequences ever. You'd be so annoyed.
Well, I'm sure teachers deal with that every day, but that's their teachers.
Most of them signed up for the job. I don't think Snape signed up for the job. I think this is really all Dumbledore's fault.
Everything comes back to Dumbledore with us. Yeah, but Harry's mostly concerned. He's like, he'll find out that I talked to Sirius and that all these things I'm keeping hidden secret that are important, but also he'll find out about my crush on Cho Chang.
That's the priority.
So, in the middle of this, Karkaroff comes into Snape's lesson, being super shady and suspicious.
Friggin' Karkaroff. He is such an idiot, honestly. Like, just so subtle there, dumbass. Hey, Snape, come over here real quick and just look at my arm in front of this whole class as I flash you my obviously racist tattoo. Like, he's just such a liability to Snape and his, like, double agentum that, like, maybe Snape should kill Karkaroff. Like, okay, I understand that, like, you shouldn't do that, but, like, at bare minimum, I think maybe Snape is in the right to, like, report Karkaroff for having the tattoo and having him, like, arrested or some shit, because, like, later on he can tell Voldemort that Karkaroff wasn't loyal and was gonna flee anyway, but, like, literally Karkaroff doing this shit is such a overall risk to the whole, like, Snape double agent saving Harry, prioritize Harry, like, storyline and, like, overall goal of Dumbledore. Like, I think maybe Snape should have done something about Karkaroff because it's such a liability. Like,
I mean, he told Dumbledore.
Can I kill him? You won't let me kill Harry Potter. You won't let me kill Igor Karkaroff. What am I here for? What am I here for?
This is like the beginning of like the Death Eater foreshadowing as Karkaroff shows something on his arm, and we've had a lot of references to arm, something about the arm so far in the last 2 chapters. So here's like more of it, and Harry's just like really confused. Like, what is he showing him on his arm?
Be anything. Just like a mom tattoo.
The trio had 2 Hogsmeade to meet up with Sirius, and Harry keeps his promise that he made that he's gonna buy Dobby all the socks he wants because Dobby saved his ass for the second task.
I'm really glad they actually did that, and they bought Dobby socks, and they had fun picking out ridiculous socks because Dobby likes ridiculous socks. As a fellow connoisseur of ridiculous socks, I love that they weren't just like, all right, we'll get him some white ankle socks, you know? They really had fun with it.
I love that he kept his promise. He's just like, in his head, he's like, Dobby saved my life with this task because Harry literally had nothing planned for the second task. He was just gonna do nothing. And Dobby did the whole thing for him.
Also, we get some, like, Ludo Bagman isms again. And, like, I kind of forget that Ludo Bagman is a red herring and they're trying to convince us that he's the problem because, like, Karkaroff is obviously such a, like, more feasible red herring, and I just forget about Ludo Bagman as, like, anything other than, like, comedic relief, basically. But yeah, he's in there, and they're trying to make him seem hella sus.
It is kind of funny. They make him seem suspicious, but then it just turns out that he has a really bad gambling problem, and he's a terrible employee.
Yeah, he's just a bad employee and a degenerate gambler, that's all.
Kind of a bad person, too, because he swindled, like, teenagers out of money, and then he's just like, well, sucks to be you guys. But anyway, they meet up with Sirius, which is great. It's finally great to just, like, see Sirius in person, as a whole last book was all about him. We don't really get a lot of Sirius.
Yeah, it was about him as an entity and not him as a character.
Yeah, so we really got to see kind of Sirius's personality as where he's still on the run, but now that we know he's a good guy. And he's really giving them kind of, like, the backstory about Crouch and kind of, like, what life was like during Voldemort's reign, where, like, you couldn't trust anyone, you never knew what was happening, people were dying, it could be your friends, your neighbors, you didn't know what was happening, and just kind of, like, yeah, it was just, like, a really great kind of, like, I guess interlude, because obviously with Voldemort coming back at the end of this book, this kind of, like, is foreshadowing for, like, what the future, because it had, like, the past repeats itself.
This is what the culture is like when Voldemort's walking around freely.
But we find out that Crouch, in the backstory that Sirius gives, that Crouch was the one that sentenced Sirius to prison without a trial. And I'm thinking, like, what could Sirius's life have been like if he actually had had a trial?
I think they would have found him guilty despite the fact that he's obviously innocent. I think if he got a trial, it wouldn't have been a very morally correct trial. I think they were definitely in a state of panic, and overreacting and over-arresting was better than letting bad guys get away.
Well, we do know that Dumbledore stuck up for Snape, as Snape was known to be Death Eater, and Dumbledore had pretty big sway back then. So I could see if he said that, like, oh, like, Peter was an Animagi because of this or whatever, then maybe Dumbledore would have been like, huh.
But I don't think Dumbledore knew all the Animagi stuff all the way yet, right? So I don't think he fully knew what was up with Sirius at that point.
But it is hard to know that, like, Sirius was sentenced without a trial, but then it doesn't kind of make sense that why, like, they didn't know anything. But, like, there's all this trauma. Even, like, poor Remus spent, like, 13 years thinking that that Sirius betrayed him and his friends, and he was the reason his friends were dead, when it was his other friend that he thought was dead the whole time. And, like, poor Remus was just going through it here.
Yeah, exactly. It really sucks that happened. I mean, it would have been nice if we knew Sirius could have gotten a real trial and they could have, like, given him whatever, the truth serum, and asked him if he did it, and they could have, like, done actual investigating about, when you cut your finger off, is there enough blood loss to have killed you? Like, if all that's left of someone is a finger, I don't think so. I think that's bad collecting of evidence if all that was left of Pettigrew was a finger. Fingers aren't the most strong part of the human body, so it's hella sus, and they should have looked into it. But they absolutely didn't, because they just wanted to say, we caught the bad guy. Ta-da, we're excellent police. Now let's get back to catching other bad guys.
Well, it kind of shows, like, how the two sides of it, because obviously when things are bad like this, like, you want justice. So the idea that, like, the good people were, bring the bad people in and just throw them in jail, and, like, they were using, like, extreme force, we're like, yes, but then also there's a side where Sirius is seeing, like, Sirius was innocent this whole time, and because he wasn't giving, like, a fair trial or, like, anything really, he was sentenced to a crime he didn't commit in prison for 13 years. And it kind of shows, like, the two sides where, like, yes, there was the bad people, Voldemort's supporters, but also, like, the people on the good side, they were also kind of ruthless.
I really understand Sirius's point about how the best way to judge someone like Crouch is based on how he treats those he sees as inferior. I don't love that Sirius just says those that are inferior, because it implies Winky is inferior and she is not. But I do understand that idea that people truly are their truest selves when they're interacting with those they see as inferior or as having lower social standing, because being nice to people you see as equal to you or above you can easily just be a way to, like, gain social mobility. Being nice to them is just a way to get something you want, really. It's the treatment of people who you don't really have something you want that actually defines, like, who you are. And I kind of see it as, like, similar to people thinking it's a red flag when their date is rude to the waitstaff, because, like, the waitstaff doesn't have anything to offer you in your date besides just, like, doing their job. And so if your date mistreats them but is kind to you, they obviously want something from you. They're on a date with you, whether that be a second date or something else from you. The waitstaff isn't going to give them anything else. So if they're rude to them, that's really what they are like as a person.
Yeah.
So, like, I really get that as a way to judge people. I also really like how Sirius talks about the difference between being a bad guy and a bad guy. Like, being a villain and being a good person are not always opposites, or nor are they being a good person and being on the right side always the same, because being against Voldemort doesn't necessarily mean a person isn't capable of doing bad things. And in the case of, like, Barty, he represents extremism on the other side. So just because he's against Voldemort doesn't mean he's not comfortable removing other people's rights and ignoring the law. He's fighting evil, but he's doing it sort of by doing evil. And it's also a nice reminder for the readers that Voldemort's followers are not the only bad people. And being not on the side of Voldemort does not mean you're immediately a good person. And so I like that. I like that we get Crouch as not a villain, but a bad guy. I think it's really important to adding, like, depth to the story. And it's sort of a better way of the whole Shades of Grey business that he talks about later that might be catchier, but isn't sort of fleshed out as well as it is here.
Yes. So the biggest part of Crouch's backstory we find out is that he sentenced his own son to prison as he was found with a group of Death Eaters. And Sirius was not sure if he was innocent or not. But it kind of shows kind of, like, the brutality that Trump...
Leave it in.
The brutality. It kind of shows the brutality that Crouch was kind of known for, that people kind of liked about him at that time, but then after seeing him put his own son through that brutality, they're just like, wait a minute. It's interesting that he didn't, like, recuse himself. Is that the right word?
Yeah, recuse himself from the jury. I agree.
I feel like he wanted to show that he could be, like, impartial no matter what.
Yeah, I think recusing yourself is saying, I am biased in this situation, and he was not biased in the situation. Maybe he was biased almost in the opposite way. Maybe he wanted his son held more accountable because of how good that makes him look and how much it shows him valuing his morals over any personal relationships.
Yeah. Ron also brings up the fact that, Snape could be evil, and Sirius is just kind of like, oh, well, I don't know about that.
He might not be a bad guy, but he's a bad guy, is what Sirius is thinking.
They kind of go into like the history that they have. He has with Snape, and he notes that like Snape was, he hung out with people that became Death Eaters, but he doesn't know about Snape for sure, and he's really into dark magic and everything. But there's something that I always find interesting is that whenever they talk about growing up with Snape, they never bring up the fact that Lily and Snape were friends, because this was like a well-established part. They were friends. They didn't hide their friendship. They were friends until they had their falling out in like their 5th year or whatever. But it's never brought up, and I just wonder if maybe it wasn't established at the time this book was written, but it just feels a weird thing for them not to bring up whenever they speak about like growing up at Hogwarts. Because Harry also asks about Snape and what he did to Lily in that memory in Order of the Phoenix, and Sirius and Remus don't say like, oh, they were friends.
Yeah, I think that maybe from the perspective of like the Marauders who really hate Snape and liked Lily, saying that she was ever friends with Snape is like blaspheming her character. Like they don't want to tell Harry bad things about his mom, and in their mind, ever having been friends with someone like Snape is like a questionable decision, and they just want him to love and remember her for all the good things. And they're like, we don't want him to know that she was ever friends with that guy, because that's like her one moral flaw, and we just want him to see his mother as wonderful and smart and having wonderful taste in people and only befriending the best people, you know? Like, I can see how they wouldn't want to tell him something. Just like no one ever tells him his dad was kind of a dick, you know? Like, listen, your dad was a good guy, he fought on the right side, but sometimes he was kind of an asshole. They didn't tell Harry that either, because they wanted him to just have that pure, joyous memory of his parents as just these good people and these guiding lights of morality. And, like, sometimes reality isn't so straightforward. And so bringing up her friendship with Snape is just like, it doesn't change anything except making Harry, like, they don't want Harry to question Snape because Dumbledore trusts Snape, so they kind of have to support Dumbledore in not turning Harry more against Snape. And I think it would either make Harry hate Snape more or question his mother, and neither of those are things anybody wants.
Another thing he brings up is that Sirius doesn't know about the dark marks, so are they not generally known? When they bring up Karkaroff showing Snape something on his arm, Sirius is like, oh, that's kind of weird, but okay.
I mean, I guess it makes sense, because if everyone in general society knew Death Eaters all had tattoos, it would be a really easy way to check if someone was a Death Eater. You just go around being like, oh, you've got a big old Nazi tattoo. Like, it's not, all that difficult to check that. So I'm guessing it's probably a secret thing. And I think they only show up, like, the stronger Voldemort is or something. So, like, while he's in power or right after he was in power, they were probably pretty noticeable. But, like, I think they were mostly secretive, but it's interesting that it's a thing. It does seem kind of like a liability to actually have, like, tattoos on all of your followers if they're trying to be real sneaky. Like, not exactly the best plan ever. Hermione's little tokens for the Order of the Phoenix seem like a better communication method than, like, big old arm tattoos.
So before they leave, they're kind of talking about Crouch, and Ron mentions that Percy works for Crouch. So Sirius asks him to write to Percy to get information on Crouch. And as they're leaving, they're talking about Crouch sending his son to jail, and Ron brings up the fact that, like, Percy would probably send one of us to jail if, like, he had to choose. And it's just kind of interesting, like, that comparison, because it kind of has the foreshadowing of the idea that Percy chooses the ministry and his career over his family and, like, the morals. Kind of like what Crouch did as well.
I think that's true. I think if one of Percy's siblings committed an actual crime, like where there was a victim who was hurt, I think Percy would send them to jail. Like, he would testify, or he wouldn't try and protect them. He would let justice do its course, I think. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like, I understand that you're supposed to love your family always, but, like, there are things that my most beloved people could do that would make me not want to support them, Like, I love you and you're always nice to me, but there are some crimes. Like, if you hurt a dog, we're not friends anymore, and I absolutely want you thrown in the worst prison imaginable, for example, So, like, they make it sound like it's the worst thing a person could possibly do to value, like, something that is very important to them morally over, like, their family. But if their family actually did it, you know what I mean? Like, if Fred or George were testing their magic potions on kids at school and they killed one of them, that's negligence. That's dangerous. That's risky. They should be at least somewhat held responsible. And also the teachers who knew it was happening and didn't do anything should also be held somewhat responsible. And I'm not against that. I don't think that's like you're a bad sibling because you don't think your brother should be allowed to kill people. I think that's, like, probably the right thing to do. It's just harder for especially, like, Gryffindor types who are so big on loyalty to understand that, like, you should never love someone unquestioningly. You should never be beyond everything loyal to someone, because you should always have things that are just too far. As much as loyalty is wonderful, there's lines that people can cross that I think you're not being disloyal for holding them accountable. You're being loyal to yourself and your values and your morals.
Yeah, I feel like this chapter is really foreshadowing that line, because Ron does end the chapter being like, oh, Percy's really ambitious.
Yeah.
And it's like that ambitious that kind of like causes him to go against like the family morals.
He also does have a really strong views on what he actually stands for. And I think if Percy had to be on a jury or something prosecuting someone in his family who had actually done the crime, I think his first thought would be, I can't believe my family member did this. I'm sad, but I want to hold them accountable, before he thinks about how bad it would look for him that they did it. You know, like I don't love Percy, but I do think he would do it out of like moral feelings and like what he thinks justice is, before he would be doing it as a public relations stunt for himself. You know, like I think why you're doing something can have a huge sort of perspective on whether or not I think it's the right thing to do. You know, doing it to make yourself look good is shitty. Doing it because you think what they did is wrong, and anyone who does that should be held accountable, in my mind, is right.
That's the end of the chapter. So do you have any final remarks before we wrap up?
I mean, I'm a little disappointed in Miss Weasley this chapter. I think knowing how she's going to treat Hermione based on that shitty article, I feel like it's not cool.
Yeah. Mrs. Weasley's like the pinnacle mother character who's always like treats the kids like the best and cares about them, and just to know that like there's that part of her that like, I don't know if it's misogyny or what it is.
There are a lot less mother figures in the series than there are father figures. So it's hard when you feel like one of the mother figures betrayed you in some way.
Yeah.
But Hermione at least has a mother back home.
She doesn't see her parents all the time, but she does have them.
They're busy. They're very busy dentists.
Yeah, but biggest thing I think is just Rita Skeeter needs to be stopped, and she doesn't know what she's unlocked in Hermione, because
you know what I kind of love about this book? This is the book where all of the children find ways to hold the adults accountable for their shitty behavior.
True.
Hermione gets Rita and swords justice. The twins sort out friggin' ruin Ludo Bagnon's situation. And I'm like, good. The justice system does not pay attention to these things. The children are sorting it out.
Yeah, so Rita has unlocked or unleashed how petty Hermione can be, and she will not be stopped.
Yeah, I love Hermione for what's coming for that. I'm like, that's one of my favorite Hermione things, I think. It's just like, because I relate to the pettiness, I relate to the anger, and I relate to well, I'm just going to sort this the heck out. I've decided we're foes, and I'm going to end you. And I'm like, wow, we're really lucky Hermione chose the side of good. We're really, really lucky.
Yeah, you don't want to be on her bad side. Next chapter is chapter 28, The Madness of Mr. Crouch. So we'll get Krum sizing Harry up as his competition and, Crouch. But if you liked this episode, give us a like on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can comment on our social media pages at Pottery Visited, or email us at potteryvisitedpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.